Welcome to the channel. Today, let's make gluten-free bacon cheddar scones. This recipe is easy to make, they taste good, and a great benefit to it, you can make them up to the point of baking them off and then freeze them so you can bake them when you need to. I'm Jamie with SavorySaver. I share gluten-free recipes, tips, tricks, and resources to make your gluten-free lifestyle easier. So please consider hitting subscribe and let's get started. So before we actually start making and baking our scones, let's go over just a few things. First of all, I got this recipe from the King Arthur baking website. It is made with their gluten-free Measure for Measure gluten-free flour. I will say, I would be really tempted to make this with whatever gluten-free blend that you typically use that has everything in it, including that xanthan gum. I kind of think it's going to work as long as you have a good scone or biscuit recipe that you already make. So keep that in mind. Some big exciting stuff with this recipe is it actually has directions for freezing them unbaked. So I will be baking some off today, but I will be freezing some of them, and then at the end of the video, I'm actually going to do one from frozen, baking it through. So we're going to do 2 tastings on this video. 1 when it comes out of the oven, and 2 after it's been frozen overnight and then we bake it off. So stay tuned to the end. Let's go over a few things because, guys, I like to change things up on here. You guys know I read the recipe and then we go off the tracks sometimes. So we're going off the tracks just a little bit. For one, this is a bacon, cheddar, and chive scone originally. King Arthur says we can use green onions, and that's what I'm going to use because I keep these on the deck. I plant the root end after we've used the onion, and the green grows back. So I'm using these instead of chives. We'll just chop them up really fine. Measuring. I am measuring all the dry ingredients out and the specific baking ingredients that we need, but the bacon, the cheddar, and the green onions that I just had, those are all close. I basically cooked off a pound of bacon. I needed half a pound for the recipe, so I cooked off the whole pound, and then I think I had 14 slices or 13 slices. I took half of those slices and I'm using it for the recipe. For the cheese, I had an 8-ounce brick. I need 4 ounces of it. I cut it in half with what looked like a half, and that's what I shredded up. So we're not doing it exact with those things. That should not throw off our recipe. The final big change that I'm making, scones typically come in wedges. I am making them in circles. I'm gonna do it biscuit style because I think a biscuit style scone is gonna make a great breakfast sandwich. I already have the bacon and the cheese. All I need is an egg in the middle of it. So tomorrow I'm gonna do a bacon, cheese, and egg scone sandwich, I guess. So we're gonna do that tomorrow as well. Once we figure out how many scones I get, we'll figure out how many we're actually gonna freeze and how many I'm gonna bake. Okay, I think that covers all the bases that I needed to with you guys. Let's get to baking. Let's get started with the recipe. So I've got a baking pan here that I have lightly greased, and you wanna either do that or use parchment paper. I opted for some shortening on the pan. That's what I like to use for baking. So I've got that on there. We're gonna pat these scones out. So I have my silicone baking mat to help with cleanup as well as sticking to the counter. I'm gonna preheat my oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. We don't need to let the dough sit from what it says, so I'm gonna turn it on so as soon as they're done, they can go in that warm oven. So I am baking by volume today, but in the description box below the video, you can find all the measurements by volume and by weight, as well as a link to the full recipe and anything you might need, like the gluten-free flour itself or the pastry mat. I try to link all that stuff below so you guys can find it if needed. So to a large bowl, I have 2 cups of the Measure for Measure flour. I'm gonna add 1 tablespoon of baking powder, a half teaspoon of table salt. The recipe does say table salt, so don't use those coarse salts in this recipe. One other thing I will say about the salt is that you might want to pay attention to the amount, especially if you have bacon that tends to be salty. You can probably cut back the salt just a little bit. or add more if you use low sodium bacon. So just be aware that's something you can change if you need to. The final dry ingredient is 2 teaspoons of granulated sugar. We want to give everything a good whisk. Once everything's been whisked together, you want to add half a stick or 4 tablespoons of cold butter. And I have cut it into smaller pieces so that I can blend it evenly into the mix. Okay, now we need to work this butter into the flour until it's crumbly, and you can have some larger pieces. That's okay with this recipe. So use your hands or 2 forks or a pastry blender, whatever you want to do. I'm actually today just going to use my clean hands. Okay, so everything's mixed in, and some of the pieces, guys, are actually good size. Like that's definitely the size of a pea. And then others are tiny. You don't want this as fine as you would mix other things. It's okay to have some bigger pieces of coated butter. So I'm gonna wash my hands because I've got to prep a little bit more. So let me get that done and we'll move forward. So part of the reason I wanted to have my hands clean is because I had to put my hand in the flour bag. And I've got my mat heavily coated with gluten-free flour. So I just wanted it ready to go when I am. So let's get the rest of the dough together so we can get these cut. So I've got about a cup of bacon again, half a pound that I've cooked off and crumbled. You want to get that in there. And if you want, just make sure there's some flour in your hands and break it up as you go across just to start distributing it. The flour will help the bacon not want to stick as much. And then I'm going to go in and coat it a little bit just to start the process because the bacon will want to stick to itself because of the grease in the bacon. Next, let's add that shredded cheese. Again, breaking it up. Again, this is coarsely grated. Use the biggest side of your cheese grater. All right, finally, let's get those green onions. Okay, here they are. They're very fine, so you want them super tiny like you were doing chives if you're not using chives. Let's mix those all around. So the final ingredient is a cup of heavy cream. So the directions actually say we're gonna go a little shy of the cup. So I've got 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream in here, along with 2 extra tablespoons of the cream. We're gonna start with this and we'll add more as needed. So the easiest way to do this is with your hands. So go in, stir it around, and it's messy, which is why I wanted that flour down ready for me. I still may need to wash my hands to get to the heavy cream again because I don't know if I'm going to need any more or not. Okay, I don't have a cohesive dough, and it says to add 2 to 3 more tablespoons of heavy cream just until it comes together. We're gonna do this a tablespoon at a time because we don't wanna add too much liquid. All right, at the moment I have 1 clean hand, so I'm gonna eyeball it and hope I don't screw it up. So there's about a tablespoon. Start mixing again. Let's add another tablespoon. This is the second one. All right, I am gonna add just a little bit more, but not the full tablespoon. I'm just gonna add just a couple dribbles. The reason I just did a little bit is because I've got a bunch of flour on the board, and I'm hoping that when I turn it over, you want a shaggy dough. So I'm hoping when I turn this out onto the mat, I can pull the rest of it together. Because most of it's together, we just have a little bit down there. So let's get this onto the mat. All right, the dough's pretty clean. So now get in there and just try to press it together. Get the rest of it in that dough. Okay, it's come together pretty good. I've still got it on my hands, but I want to pat it out into a circle. You want it about 3/4 of an inch high, and you want the circumference to be about 7 inches. So I've already got this marked here, so I've actually got, a guide that I can use. So I'm gonna press it out. All right, I've got it pressed into a circle. So the 7 inches, it's probably about 3/4 of an inch. I'm assuming since it wants a 7-inch circle, that once it's pressed down to that it's about 3/4 of an inch. I'm not gonna measure it. All right, so I've got a cutter. It's 3 inches. I'm gonna punch it out. And then put it on the pan. So let's see how many I can get. The original recipe as wedges says you should get about 8. Let's take the scraps, push them back together. Press it down to the height of the other scones. So again, 3/4 of an inch. All right, so I ended up with 6 scones, and I actually think that they're probably a little taller than 3/4 of an inch. I think they're gonna end up being about an inch. We're gonna hope that everything's good. I did get one little baby one here. I think what I'm gonna do is, since there's 6 of them and the extra, I think I'm gonna bake off 3 and the little one. So the 3 back here, I'm gonna freeze on another baking sheet. Once they're frozen, we'll get those in a Ziploc bag and into the freezer so they can stay separated. And then tomorrow I'll bake one off. For these, I'm gonna coat them in a little bit of that heavy cream, and that's gonna help with the browning. Okay, let's get these baked off. You wanna bake them for 20 to 22 minutes until they're golden brown. Then remove them from the oven. You can cool them on the pan, and then you can serve them warm or at room temp. So let's get these baked. I'll let them cool for just a couple minutes, and then we'll give them a try. It's been 22 minutes. I did the full bake time. They actually puffed up really nicely, and they're nice and golden. So I'm gonna let them cool for just a few minutes, and then we'll give this little guy a taste. So it's time to give these a taste, and I will say I had a thought, what if I don't like these? And I told you guys I was gonna bake them from frozen tomorrow and do a breakfast sandwich. I don't know what we're gonna do, but we're gonna try them anyway. So let's break this one open. It's still steaming and pretty hot. From what I can tell, it is all baked through. It's a little soft in the middle. You have to remember the bacon in here still has some grease in it, so it should help keep these from drying out. Everything looks baked from what I can tell, so let's try it. Those are good. I like those. All right, guys. So initial thoughts, it's a good recipe. It is King Arthur, and I will say King Arthur is a little grittier than some other gluten-free flour blends, so keep that in mind. Overall, this is very good, and I can taste a little bit of the grit, but not much. There is no reason not to make this recipe at this point. It was an easy recipe to do. I love the bacon and the green onion and the cheddar all in there. I have to say it really doesn't have a gluten-free taste, which always a winner in my opinion. So I don't have anything to say about this recipe at this point. It's a good recipe to try if you want to bake them off and eat them as is. At this point, it does say, cool them down, wrap them tightly, and plastic wrap, and then put them in a container, pop them in the fridge. They'll last for 3 or 4 days in the fridge. Just reheat them before you eat them. In regards to the other ones are in the freezer. So tomorrow I am going to take one out of the freezer and bake per the directions, which I'm going to take it out. I'm going to brush a little bit of cream on it. We'll bake it in the oven. So we're going to do that tomorrow. So let's jump ahead so we can do that and I can try that. So it's the next morning. These are frozen. The 2 I'm not gonna bake, you wanna wrap tightly in plastic wrap and get those into a freezer storage bag until they're needed. As far as the one I'm gonna bake off, the recipe says to put it on a piece of parchment paper. I'm not gonna do that, I'm gonna do it right on the sheet. Hopefully it doesn't stick, but we'll see. In regards to baking it, I'm gonna put a little more heavy cream over the top of the one I'm baking, and I'm gonna bake it for an additional 2 to 4 minutes from the original bake time. So the original bake time was 20 to 22 minutes. I'm gonna bake this for 22 to 24 minutes. At that point, I'm gonna take it out of the oven. I'm gonna make a breakfast sandwich with it, with an egg and possibly some additional cheese, and we're gonna give this a taste. I've baked it for 24 minutes, so I'm gonna get a sandwich made out of it, and then we're gonna give it a try. So here's my breakfast sandwich. I've got the scone, egg, more cheese. I'm gonna give it a taste. I don't know how this is gonna go on camera. It might fall apart. Let's see. That's really good. And it actually did not really fall apart any. The scone on the outside is a little crispy. The egg and cheese, of course, help the scone actually stick together a little bit. All right, let me put this down and we'll talk about baking them from frozen. So for baking these scones, I did go the full 24 minutes. And actually, I think it was in there about 30 seconds to a minute more before I got to the timer to get it out. Perfect bake time. I really like the little bit of crispness around the edges. As far as the inside is tender. It's got good texture. I can't really tell it's gluten-free. I like all of those things. Definitely use a little bit of cream or milk on the top. That will help with the browning as it bakes. To open up the scones, I actually used a fork and did a fork split method like you would with English muffins. I felt that that was really helpful, and it actually came apart really easily that way for me. So that's what I did for this one. As far as freezing and baking, I think it's good. I think it came out really well for keeping them in the freezer. So if you only want a couple, if you make these, I would definitely cook off the ones you want, but freeze the rest of the unbaked scones so you have them when you're ready. Guys, that's all I have for today. I've got to finish this breakfast. So please leave me your comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.